Hello and welcome to the Aerospace Ambition Podcast. This is Kieran, accompanied by my co-host Marius. As aerospace engineers, we delve into the nexus of sustainable aviation, artificial intelligence, and the climate crisis. Today's episode centres on the practical aspects of preventing and handling contrails. Contrails are the white ice trails left by aircraft at high altitude, and they have a potentially large warming effect due to absorbing and re-emitting thermal radiation back towards Earth, more so than they reflect incoming sunlight. So Marius, who's our guest for today's discussion?
Hello Kieran, and a warm welcome to all our listeners. Today we're delighted to welcome Joachim Majholm. He's an accomplished business leader, serial entrepreneur, and communicator with a rich background spanning over 20 years. Joachim founded Blue Lines, an organization that raises awareness for the environmental impact of contrails. Blue Lines is focused on hastening the adoption of regulations to reduce the climate effects caused by warming contrails from airlines. Recently, Joachim has also joined the Rocky Mountain Institute as a senior consultant for Contrails. Welcome, Joachim.
Thank you very much. Been looking forward to it.
Great to have you. So, first question that comes to my mind would be, you have such a diverse background. How did you get into contrails?
That was kind of a coincidence. As you said, I'm not a scientist. I'm not an engineer. I have a business and communication background. And a few years back, I decided that I wanted to get into the climate. I took some courses, Berkeley Extension, UC Berkeley. I live in San Francisco, so it's just around here. Took a course at Terra.do and just found this was an amazing area and felt very purposeful to work with climate. And then I got introduced to one of your former guests, Mark Shapiro, who was at that time 2 years ago working for in a small organization called Orca Sciences and looking at what to do with these contrails and how he could build software to try to predict how to avoid the areas of cold and humid air where lasting contrails with a big climate impact occur. And he didn't have a website, so we wrote up we talked about how to communicate this and how to get people engaged. And after my 3-month contract with him ran out, he joined Breakthrough Energy, or the whole group got installed by Breakthrough Energy, where they are now. And I went on to other things, but I just couldn't forget this amazing opportunity of contrail management. So I decided to found my own little nonprofit, Blue Lines. And just by pure coincidence, the week my website or Blue Lines website was released was the same week that Breakthrough Energy released their website, and also Google Research came out with their Contrail website. So two big ones and a little tiny one from almost no, easy to understand websites about contrails before that. And since then, I've been on different projects and been moderating some Contrail talks at different aviation conferences, and joined the Rocky Mountain Institute Contrail task force 3 months ago and helping them for the next few months to mainly producing a big roadmap for the industry of how to implement contrail management in the future.
Can you expand a bit on exactly what Blue Lines is as an organization and maybe what its role is in the ecosystem?
Blue Lines is just a resource to educate and communicate about contrails. And what are we doing in the ecosystem? I mean, the ecosystem is so small. So I think, we've successfully helped connect some people that were not connected before. Happy to talk to anyone who wants to do any press about this, or talk to some airports that want to, thinking of communicating this, helping other organizations with how to communicate what they're doing. So just trying to be helpful. And as you know, this is I think 90% of your former guests have been engineers. So I feel like I'm one of the only ones who's not a scientist or an engineer in this world. And so I have other skills that can maybe be useful.
And you're involved with the Rocky Mountain Institute, as Marius said. So you're a consultant there. What is it that you're currently working on?
I don't know how much I'm supposed to say, but and I just want to say I'm not representing any public opinions in this podcast from Rocky Mountain Institute. I'm just, part-time consultant. But we're working on a white paper with Roland Berger on actual solutions to Contrail mitigation or Contrail management. And that will be published in a couple of months. And then we're working on this big roadmap, which is an industry effort, like with other NGOs, with airlines involved, OEMs like Boeing, Airbus, lots of scientists. So that will be hopefully I'm hoping, an influential roadmap that the industry as a whole will look to for what to do with Contrail management.
Let's talk a little bit about the airline index that you present on bluelines.org. Could you please explain to our listeners what the airline index represents and how meaningful it is?
So first of all, I have to say I love airlines. I'm from Denmark. I live in San Francisco. If I would have to take a train or a boat when I had to visit my family back in Denmark, I would have big problems. I think airlines are amazing, and I think they generally want to do the right thing, but they're also businesses, and they got to think about the shareholders. I have this belief that if you have a problem, you need to, the first step to do something about your problem is to acknowledge that you have it. So think about the alcoholic, you have to admit that you have an alcohol problem before you can start doing something about it. So with that in mind, we started systematically searching for every major airline's name and do thorough research to see if anyone has mentioned or been involved with Contrails, and started off with about 8 months ago, I think, with 8 or 9 airlines on the list. So we list those airlines and provide links to where they have publicly said that they are involved with some kind of Contrail management trial or research, or even, being just acknowledging the problem exists. And that is at various degrees, some just acknowledge it, some are deeply involved. And then we make a list that everyone can go and check out. It's updated whenever there's a new entry. Last update was November, but and then it's updated when some of the core airlines do something that are already there, do something different. And I want to, talk about 2 of them that do something extraordinary. Delta Airlines has set some goals that they publicized. They want to reduce contrail warming from their flights by 80% in 2035 and by 100% in 2050. So I think they're the only airline, or at least the first one, to publicize some goals. And last week, a couple of weeks ago, Air France publicized a website, on their own website, a page stating that they are responsible for non-CO2 emissions, including contrails, and that they want to do something about it. And that sometimes it's a question about wording. So for a long time, airlines who have said anything about contrails say it may warm, but Air France, they're listening to the scientists now and saying, of course, it does warm. And now we're actually admitting we have this problem. And this is how big the problem is. And this is and we want to do something about that. And then they're also talking about the different projects they're involved in. And I think, those 2 examples are great examples for other airlines to follow. And hopefully a lot will happen this year, because every airline will have to disclose all their non-CO2 in Europe, their non-CO2 climate impact from next year.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the shift of airlines going from sort of hiding the climate impact of aviation to now being quite upfront about it and not beating around the bush when it comes to the actual science that we do have a relatively good understanding on. Of course, there's still a lot of uncertainties, which we've talked about in previous episodes. But the fact that they're acknowledging that there's a big problem here that we have to solve, and there's a lot of potential to solve a lot of the problem in a relatively short time frame if we are upfront about it and if we do talk about it and we make these policy changes that need to happen.
As far as I know, and I'm really happy if any listener go to the website and look at bluelines.org, blue-lines.org, and go to the airline index, and they see that the airline that they just read about is not there. Please let me know. We got a few entries from that. And we also know of other airlines that have not publicly said that they're doing trials or involved in projects, but they are. And they're not on the list because, we need them to publicly say it. It's great that they also do that. But saying that airlines have started doing it, Kieran, is almost a stretch. I mean, I think it's like, a couple of airlines that are really saying without no doubt that we are responsible for it.
I went to the website before this interview and also checked, and it's great to see really a bunch of airlines that are on the list and that are either doing research or they're actively engaged in, EU projects or even doing live trials. However, to be honest, it's very few. So right now, how many airlines are actually doing like real live deviations?
Right now, I don't have the number on top of my mind, but I would say it's likely just around 10. I mean, if you say live deviation, that includes airlines having done a couple just as a trial. I think the UK based Satavia, they have worked with more airlines, just as very, maybe a couple of trials. And then they have publicly, they haven't worked with that many, but behind the scenes, or what do you call, like, there are a lot of airlines, and I think, I just listened to the episode with Alejandra from Flight Keys, and she was also saying that their customers are asking for trials, but that doesn't mean that they are publicly announcing that they are doing trials, because with a public announcement also comes a kind of a responsibility. You're saying, hey, our climate impact is actually maybe twice as big as we've told you so far. And even though we can easily take care of a big chunk of that, we can't take care of all of it. So the net addition to the climate problem is significant. And I think that's one of the factors that holds back a lot of airlines from publicly going out and embracing the problem and the solution to contrail management.
So do you think the lack of real-world trials is largely due to the scientific certainty not really being there yet? Or do you think it's more the fact that we don't have the regulation available, there's no financial incentive to carry this out? Which side of that do you think is swaying airlines more?
I think it's a big bag of all these different factors. I think another one is we just have to remember that airlines are huge conservative organizations, especially those we're talking about here, like some of the world's biggest airlines that are actually doing this: American, Delta, Southwest, and so on. And it takes a long time to implement any kind of change in organizations like that. Also, so that's one side, yes. And then this is, it's been, everyone in the Contrail world think that everything is moving kind of fast. We're a lot of more people, and Kieran, you just mentioned that things are happening now. But I still think on the agenda of airlines, sustainability is not number one. Safety is number one, then is a business, and then later comes sustainability. And within the sustainability bracket, Contrails non-CO2 is not a top of mind. That's more like, okay, what kind of planes are we going to buy in the future, and how are we going to get the sustainable aviation fuels to bring down our CO2? So we're low on the list that is already low on the list of priorities in an airline. And everyone in this world is like trying to get the amazing solution of contrail management higher on both lists.
Will there be a point where there is enough certainty that this solution needs to be implemented, that then all of a sudden it turns and then everyone has to act really quickly, because we know that in order to scale this up, processes are slow. So you can't just wait for the regulation to come and press a button, right? It's maybe something where you need to slowly test and trial and do this for maybe 2-3 years. So do you reckon that there will be some kind of turning point, or will this be a slowly increasing process?
Interesting question. I wish I knew. Airlines are probably also very different, and the different departments in airlines are reacting at different speeds. I'm sure. If you look at the trials, it's also like, in my mind, I've been thinking about what's going on, and I see two kinds of trials going on. There's like the ones that have a big corporate, are equivalent to big corporates. So those are the big European trials, like Zirconia, where they have the whole ecosystem involved. Everything is done extremely thoroughly. Everything is laid out and planned, and lots of meetings to do everything in the right way. And those are very important because it brings the ecosystem together. They're very thorough. They don't make many mistakes. And then there is the more of a startup approach, which is what maybe Flight Keys are doing, where they're like, okay, somebody calls them, say, hey, can we try this? And how's this done? And Flight Keys get together with Breakthrough Energy and maybe Google Research, and they do the American Airlines trial. That was publicized half a year ago, where they flew 70 flights one way with not avoiding contrails, and going back they tried everything they could to avoid contrails, and then they looked at the results after to see if contrails were avoided, and got very positive results. And they didn't get the whole community together for that. They just did it. And that is important too, because you learn a lot from that. And it's way quicker than the other method, where in Europe, they're still discussing how to do those trials. So we need both. And I think, I don't know if that answered your question. It probably didn't at all. It's just, but it's just like there are so many different approaches to how we can move forward here, and I think that all approaches are, both these kinds are really important, and can work in unison, and can inspire some airlines to get involved, and others will want to wait until all the mistakes or most of the mistakes have been ruled out, and we are more precise.
So there are two approaches to this: the startup approach, but then also these big, gigantic consortia which trial this. You need both. And the projects that you mentioned, I think what they had in common was this Pareto kind of distribution, where you only had to tweak some flights in order to achieve a big result. Yet in all of these projects, it's very likely that there will be some kind of fuel penalty, even if we get it down. From your experience looking at airlines, do you have a feeling of what kind of fuel penalty could eventually be acceptable? Not talking about the late adoption, when the regulation is there, but on the way there.
If you look at the price of a ticket, which should, even be equal to airline expenses plus some profits for airlines, then if you look at airline expenses, it's like around 20% is fuel. So if you add to that fuel 0.0 something in fuel penalty, and even if you say, okay, let's just add that to the whole expense because you also have to have more people hired within the big airlines to do this, and there are other expenses, right? Could also be a little bit of time expense. So let's just say that this is not just on fuel, but let's say that the best practices will be across all costs added as for 0.3% or something, and for a return ticket from San Francisco to Copenhagen that I sometimes take, let's say that's $1,000. If airlines passed all their costs down to me as a passenger, it wouldn't even be $1 on top. And those, without, I can't completely defend that math, but It's in that ballpark, and that is just nothing. It's really isn't anything. And this is when you go for those low hanging those 80% that we can kind of comfortably take care of. The science shows us without a huge fuel penalty. The rest of the 20%, the final 20% is another question, and that can be more difficult to take care of. But if we can manage to avoid 80% of contrail warming, that it would be a huge feat. And I'm very happy to pay 50 cents or $1 more on my long haul ticket, or 10 cents on my local ticket within Europe, for airlines to do that.
So if this really is such a tiny fraction of the cost of a ticket, how do we motivate airlines to go beyond the marketing stunts, the one flight trials, and the the big PR stunts, which are aimed at gaining publicity but won't necessarily get us far down the road in terms of testing the science and operational feasibility?
That is the question that I would also like to know the answer to. I think a lot is happening behind the closed doors. I don't think most of them are super keen to come out and say, hey, we have this huge problem and we're not really doing anything about it. I think they would like to present the problem and the solution at the same time, most of them. I think public awareness, which is why I started Blue Lines, is really lacking in this area. And that's also why I love your podcast, because hopefully both contribute to public awareness. I think there's an fantastic opportunity for an airport or an airline to be the first ones to do a public campaign and say, hey, Schiphol Airport wants to tell you about this, or British Airways would like to really spend money on a campaign, maybe not just a website, but also just telling all the passengers about it, and couple that with some action. I think that would be great. I think I would love to talk more to airlines about how to do this, and how they learn what their concerns are. Apart from it might be that it's something that we don't really talk about here. We have airlines in the Contrail Impact Task Force, and it's always interesting when they have something to say when we meet. It's not public information, so it's not public meetings, but it's great that they participate and listen in and give their 2 cents on the different topics. I think mostly they're waiting for a little bit more consensus on metrics and uncertainties and all that. But even for the uncertainties, even at the very, very low, if we say that contrails have the lowest of the lowest impact on climate, it's still worth to do something about it.
Now, this is a question I was looking forward to ask you as an investor as well, because the question that I wanted to ask you was, as an investor, you usually try to, diversify. You invest in many solutions in order for one to flourish, right? And when I look at this ecosystem right now, I feel like there are such few players actually who take a more entrepreneurial approach to this. So there are these big institutions and we'll definitely need them, but sometimes disruption can also happen from, more smaller teams, who can move more agile. And so how do you look at this from more like an investor point of view? Is this ecosystem diversified enough?
So I would never invest in this if I wanted to make money. I would not invest in a company that only did Contrail management, because if you in San Francisco, where I am right now, there's this rule of thumb. You go to if you invest in a company, you have to have a market that is looking to be worth $1 billion or more if you get 100% of the market. There's no way that Contrail management is going to be anywhere near $100 billion. $1 billion worth of $1 billion, and it's simply because it's so cheap to do. You don't have to sell tons and tons of sustainable aviation fuel. You don't have to produce green hydrogen for future planes. You just have to tell people to airlines to slightly deviate their cruising altitude, and that's about it. Then there's a little bit of verifying that they did it, and there's good consultancy work, but then that won't scale very easily. So I think that's also the reason why there aren't very many companies in this yet. I think there's room for many more, because all these airlines will need help to implement this. They will need help to report it, and to have to think about how to communicate it, how to reorganize tiny bits of their organization, and there are a few great small companies that are looking into this now, and also how to make all the pilots aware that this is important, and implement that behavioral change throughout the organization. But I don't think that any one of them will be billion-dollar companies. I don't think they think that themselves either.
So avoiding contrails is, in theory, quite a minimally invasive approach, right? So compared to implementation of sustainable aviation fuel, hydrogen aircraft, like you were saying, these are things which will take at least decades to implement. However, you also touched on the operational constraints, so the issues related to air traffic management having to take this on as an additional measure on top of increasing hazardous weather, increasing airspace density, and now we're going to say to them, you've got to actually block out regions of airspace. It doesn't really make much sense as it is at the moment. So that sort of takes us on to the question from Remy from last week. His question was, Joachim, how do you think we can overcome the operational constraints that are involved in contrail avoidance procedures and systems?
This is an area that I'm personally very curious to know more about. So I would be reluctant to answer that, because I don't know enough. I'm learning about it currently. We're going to have a whole chapter about it in the roadmap, because it's so important to get that part. I think what helped me was also, right now when we're doing trials, let's say when Flykeys is doing a trial with a low-cost European carrier, they are the only ones that know that this chunk of airspace should be closed off. So then it's like if you're on a 5-lane highway and every 100 cars know that they cannot use 3 of the lanes, you won't create a traffic jam. But as soon as all the cars know that they should avoid those 3 lanes, you will have a huge traffic jam, right? So for the next couple of years, when only a few airlines are doing this, we won't have many airspace problems. But soon enough, that will be something that people much smarter than me will have to talk more about and try to solve.
I think it was a very tough question that Remy asked, and of course we only pass on the questions that are not answered yet, right? And I think that this operational constraint is something there's just no data out there at the moment right now, because you can have these simulations and then you can have single players trying this, but doing this at scale is something that has not yet been simulated, and it's something you can only do by scaling up the trials. So Remy, sorry about that, but we'll have to wait, I guess, a little bit more for data to come in. What we can do, however, is we can look a little bit into what happened in 2023 and try to extrapolate some kind of trajectory into the new year. And you sent out a post or a text that was making some kind of prediction about 2024, and there were 2 things that you predicted, or that you see opportunities for, and that is we will see first fleet-wide testing and airline involvement will double. Where do your assumptions come from?
So First of all, I want to say, the business of doing prediction is very shitty. By the end of the year, if you're right, everyone will think that was obvious. Anybody knew that. And if you're wrong, you're just an idiot, right? So, so the first fleet-wide trial, I think I heard rumors that is on the way. And I'm just hoping that it will be successful and they will publish the results and do that. And of course, you can't say anything about who it is and so on. But it makes sense that it's possible with software like flight keys, where you can run every single flight through to see which ones are you should recalculate. And for the airline involvement to double, I'm thinking of having twice as many airlines on the Contrail airline index. This year has not gone off to a great start. We haven't added a single one yet, so we will have to have 17 more. But I'm thinking that when airlines realize that the European reporting requirements for non-CO2, including contrails, are right around the corner, they will, during the year, tell their customers, passengers, companies that use them that they are also aware of this and they're also doing something about it. So I am hoping that we will see a steady stream of airlines admitting to this problem and being engaged in some kind of solutions.
And just to confirm, by fleet-wide testing, do you mean one airline?
I mean one airline that runs all their trajectories through some kind of let's find out which ones.
Okay. Yeah.
Instead of just singling out like big hits, or let's do a few on this particular route, let's do our whole network and see what we can do. That's the hope.
Last year in November, there was 1 week where I thought to myself, so foul and fair a week I've not yet seen. That's because there were two things that happened within that week, and one was really good signaling, let's say, for the whole movement of contrail management, and the other one was a little bit like holding back. So on the 23rd of November, the European Commission published a press release that officially put out a huge amount of money and called for solutions, for sustainable solutions, and included contrails in there. So they explicitly said contrails are a problem and please provide solutions for that. That was one kind of signaling. And then I'd say the other direction was on the 28th of November, where there was a follow-up Lee et al. Paper, which was basically highlighting the uncertainties in mitigating these non-CO2 effects. How did you experience this week?
Yeah, that was a little schizophrenic. In a way, the EU is acting like a startup here. They're saying, hey, we don't have the right solution, but we know that there's a problem, and we know that if we motivate people with money to try to solve this, we can, trial and error. Some will succeed, some won't succeed, but we will get much closer to a solution much faster than if we just sat down and waited for the private markets to figure this out and find out. And at the same time, we had this paper coming out, which of course for airlines who are not eager to jump into this is very welcome, because you can say the uncertainty is so big, and some of the biggest scientists in this area are saying that we shouldn't do anything. I am in San Francisco. I'm very much in favor of you gotta break some eggs to make an omelet, right? You gotta try out some things to move forward. If we sit and wait for uncertainty on the climate impact of contrails and the uncertainties in predicting where contrails will appear, I think we can wait for decades if we want to be 100% certain. And meanwhile, the Earth will heat up, and we will start all these tipping points, and I am uncertain of why David Lee, Keith Shine, and company are so focused on saying that we shouldn't do anything. I'm debating with myself if I want to say anything about this, but you had one of the co-authors as a guest a few weeks back, and I think it was kind of telling that she didn't know who Flykeys was, because Flykeys is a very big player in the non-CO2 the practical application of contrail avoidance. And this paper is basically saying that the science isn't ready, that we shouldn't be doing, we should be focusing on CO2 and forgetting about non-CO2 for a while until we get more certain. That's how I understand it. And it actually seems like they're not really too eager to follow along at what has been happening at a very rapid speed, especially if you look at it from a scientific point of view, where advances are made, usually are made pretty slowly and thoroughly. Then for the last couple of years, like we talked about earlier, things have been really picking up speed. And I think on the other side, the people who really like to get in, it's really healthy that somebody points out, hey, be aware that if you spend too much CO2, this makes no sense. I think that's a really valid point, and it's great that somebody makes that point really loudly. But on the other hand, to say, don't experiment, don't try to advance this really fast, don't, focus on the very slow solution, which is, and we should keep doing that. Of course, we should keep, getting rid of CO2. That's incredibly important, but it's not either or, it's both. And I think the EU announcing that they want to put aside a big amount of money for projects, also within Contrails. And I hope that somebody are really trying to get that money and doing something with it. I think that's a clear signal that the majority of scientists believe that it's time to do something now. And then there are some voices that say no, but that's how it is.
So the EU is taking the startup approach here, which is great. What is your expectation now with regards to regulatory timeline or the options? I'm sure you've stumbled across the term of like carrot and stick. What do you expect in terms of regulation? What makes sense from your point of view?
That's part of the white paper we're coming up with from Rocky Mountain Institute and Roland Berger. And without saying too much, I mean, it's a little hard. There isn't like a silver bullet here that one solution fixes all. That can be implemented within a very short time frame and with no trouble, and everyone's happy. It's probably a slew, a big, many parallel solutions that would be the most efficient thing to do and make most sense. In general, I think what we looked at is, if you look at other businesses, like how did we implement electric cars that are very popular now, getting more and more popular? One of the things here in California, for instance, is that you got $7,500 rebate paid by the state. So that's a clear incentive. And that is going away now, because now everybody wants an electric car. So you don't have to pay those $7,500 anymore. And prices have also dropped because of higher demand for them and more production. So usually you start with the incentives, and then when the incentives have created some kind of behavioral change, like we start to buy electric cars in a lot of us, then you can phase out the incentives, and then regulatory options or policy options will take over. And that could be from ICAO, or the IATA, or it could also be from politicians in the EU or the US, which are, the biggest areas of contrail warming.
So this is regulation, which is a very difficult topic right now because there is no data as well. Let's take a step back. I'm curious, what role will consumers play in the mitigation or management of contrails? Is there a role for consumers to play?
Absolutely. I think number one, they have to find out that it exists. And even though we're here in a podcast, and if you landed from Mars, you could think that everybody knows about this because we're talking about it, but nobody knows. I mean, this is the best kept secret in climate, that there is a solution here that can take care of 1 to 2% of climate change in more or less instantly, and it won't demand any behavioral change. It won't cost much, and it's almost ready. So we need to tell everyone about this. I mean, and as soon as you know, as a company who's like, companies are increasingly aware that they need to lower their climate footprint and look at their scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. This is, as if this is added as a scope 3 emission, and you can choose between Marius Airlines, which manages their contrails, and Joachim Airlines, which does not, then, the airline that doesn't do it will very fast see get to change their behavior and start managing their contrails. But it demands that there's much more knowledge and awareness in among the consumers, and that is recognized by the Science-Based Target Initiative, that they recognize that this should be counted in as a scope 3 emission, and this should be something that companies should report, maybe even the impact from that. And one of the things that could help drive this change is the work that is going on now with the Google impact model. I can't remember the exact name, where you go to Expedia or booking.com or whatever, you book when you book your flight online. Sometimes most listeners will have noticed, I'm sure, that you get a little notification saying, hey, this is a good choice, this is the lowest CO2 emissions from this flight, or a little nudge to say, hey, maybe consider this other flight because this has lower CO2 emissions, or this the one you chose has higher than average. There are different ways, and now soon they are working on implementing the non-CO2 effects as well. So saying, hey, could be, I'm just thinking aloud here, it could be that, hey, this is a nighttime flight. There's a likelihood that this flight will make contrails and add to climate change and global warming. Maybe you want to take a daytime flight instead. That could be better for, yeah.
I think that consumers definitely play an important part in this sort of self-reinforcing feedback loop. It's all about the communication and outreach from the scientists and from the marketing bodies to convince the consumers and to convince the end users that this is really a problem. And then as a result of that, they would be much more inclined to actually maybe pay a slightly different fee or to book a flight which was implemented contrail avoidance. And to really sort of spark this initiative, I think it's so important that we have this high-level communication. And it's one of the reasons why we thought this was such a good idea to do this podcast, is communicating the science, especially when it comes to climate science. It's absolutely paramount at the moment. And I think that it will play a big role in the years to come when implementing these contrail avoidance strategies.
I completely agree.
We're coming to the time where it's time to pass on the ball. From our previous guest, Remy, we had a question, and now it's your chance to ask a question to our next guest, who will be Professor Stephen Barrett from MIT. So, do you have any questions for Professor Barrett that you'd like to share?
I do. What a guest. I had the pleasure of meeting him at the Eurocontrol meeting in November. So I would ask Stephen Barrett, what does he think are the 3 biggest problems holding back the adoption of contrail management at scale? And what can the ecosystem do to solve those problems? And by the ecosystem, I mean anybody who's, if it's an ATC problem, then what should be done there? If it's a, science problem, what kind of research do we need?
Okay, great question.
This leaves us to conclude the episode. Thank you so much, Joachim, for being our guest. This was very insightful. And we keep following you, of course, with the work that you do with Blue Lines. and the posts that you share there. I recommend everyone to subscribe to your newsletter there. And of course, you also placed some teasers here and there for the white paper that is coming out with the Rocky Mountain Institute. So please share it with us. Until then, all the best.
Likewise, it was such a pleasure meeting you, and thank you for doing this. Very important to get the word out. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Joachim. See you soon. Bye.
See ya.